Hi, this is a video looking at the June 2000 exam. We're looking at the reading exam, paper 2 for the EDUQAS GCSE English Language. I will leave a link to the exam paper in the video comments if you want to look for it, or just look for it through the video. So we're going to go through questions 1 to 3 first, as they're basically the same question. So in this exam you must time manage. It's a 3-mark question, so we're looking for 3 minutes at the most. There you go, question 1, first one we start with. So you need to identify the keywords in the question and scan through the text to find them. It's basically testing your ability to identify information. This is a nice little question the exam board used just to get you into the exam, a little warm-up activity. So you're going to be asked to look for explicit points. So for example, it was busy in the shop, so something obvious. And then maybe implicit points, something maybe not as obvious. So for example, the queue snaked around half the shop. That's maybe a more subtle way of saying it was busy in the shop. But mainly it's going to be A. So to answer this question, use whole sentences but keep them brief. Do not copy out whole chunks and sentences. So a few little tips, teacher tips I'm going to show you. Read each question twice to make sure you don't do a simple mistake. Highlighter might be good to use. I'm going to zip through this, so feel free to pause if you want to read the whole part. Be specific, only highlight the key parts of the question. And there they all are as 1. Many students fail to gain full marks on this question just because they don't read the question properly. You need to answer in simple sentences. So for example, if you get a question where it says list 4 things, okay, and the answer would be he had wild eyes, write he had wild eyes, don't just put wild eyes. Yeah. So just make sure, you don't have to write a massive sentence, but just make sure you write enough to get the answer. These are only worth 1 mark each, so if you can't find one of the 1-mark questions, just leave a gap and go back to it at the end of the exam. You are really not going to do well if you spend 5 or 6 minutes looking for a 1-mark question. If you can't find it, go back to it at the end. Okay, so there you go. Okay, there's the 2 texts. Okay, this is how it look. So for example, give one example from the article about how the worst prisoners were punished. Okay. Okay. They were forced to work in silence. At the time of the article was written how many prisoners were there? 439. Give one example of the privileges that prisoners may earn for good behaviour. They might get a mirror, radio or TV. So really simple questions, give it a really simple answer. Okay, again, leave the question if you can't find it. Question 3 is exactly the same, the only difference being it is on the 19th century text, so the older text. Don't panic. Yeah, if you get the 19th century text, do it exactly the same as the other one. Generally, it will be easy to read. So, like I say, don't get too stressed from the 19th century. Treat it exactly the same as the one from the 21st century. Okay. The only difference being that there might be some words you're unfamiliar with, but generally, even though it was written in the 19th century, it will be quite easy to read. So when Charles Dickens visited the prison, what did he describe as awful? And in the actual text it says the quiet of the prison, so just write that. B, give 2 details that suggest the prisoners were in there for a long time, so you just need to pick out 2 lines or 2 quotes. Okay, the punishment is prolonged for years. He lives in the same cell for 10 weary years. He grows old. So there's 3 things that you could have chosen. So I'm not copying out massive 4 lines in the text, just a couple, just a 3 or 4 word phrase in the text. Okay, so let's look at question 2. So question 2 will still be on the first article, so the modern text. And these are the things we're going to be looking for to maybe talk about. So adjectives, verbs, word choice. However, it's not needed on every point. So please don't talk about verbs and similes and hyperbole and personification. If you're doing 5 or 6 PEs, maybe just do it once or twice at the most. You do not get marks in the exam for just saying that's alliteration, that's personification. The whole point is what effect does it have on the reader. So write your answers from top to bottom. Okay. How does the writer show that Nick Wallender's tightrope walk is astonishing dramatic? So basically, if it's a 10-mark question, which this one is, question 2 will always be a 10-mark question, you're looking at about 13 to 15 minutes, and I've put here 5 to 8 quotes. However, what I would say is just do as many quotes, talk about and explain as many quotes as you can in that 13 minutes. If you've only done 2 quotes, don't spend more time on it. You've only got 13 minutes, as many quotes as you can do. So like I say, don't do terminology in every point. If you're not sure, what a verb is. If you're not sure what alliteration is, leave it. Don't say something is personification, for example, if it's not. That will look worse, okay? So if you're really confident, use it. If you're not, then don't. Okay, so you need to use a range of quotes. So what I mean by this is you need to use quotes from the beginning, middle and end of the extract. So this will not get you high marks. It says on the examiner reports a range of text through the whole article. So we don't want this. Okay, that's not going to get, because it's basically showing you, it looks to the examiner that you've only read the first part of the article. We want something like this. Yeah, so we've got quotes from all over the article from start, middle and end. That's going to help you. Okay, like I say, right from top to bottom. So for example, if we go back to here, write your first PE on the first thing you've highlighted and the last one on the last. So in the how question, you need to analyse the writer's use of language. So what does analyse mean? So it basically means examine something. So examine a 1 or 2 word phrase or quote in detail and explain why the writers used it. So we're going to comment on the effect of words and how they make the reader feel. So we're going to look through the extract. So in this case, the question is about how does the writer make it astonishing. We're going to pick out a word that the writer has used to make it astonishing and then say how it makes the reader feel. So an example question could be, how did the writer make the weather seem scary to the boy with the quote, the rain thumped against the windows? How does that quote make it scary for the boy? Okay, so we're looking where a writer deliberately uses words to achieve a special effect on the reader. So the word we're going to zoom in on, we are going to zoom in on the word thumped. Okay, so we're going to look at the word thumped, the rain thumped against the window, and we're going to say, why has the writer chosen to use that word? So for example, if the quote was the rain tapped against this window, the feeling we would get would be something like this. So this is like a little soft, a tap is a soft thing, a little soft, gentle thing, which would give a totally different idea of the rain to the reader. Okay, so this would be sort of soft rain, wouldn't it? Nice, gentle little summer rain, soft tapping. Okay. However, the writer has used the word thump. So what do we think of the word, the verb thumped? What do we think about that? So we think of power, don't we? We think of aggression, we think of violence. We think of basically, if someone's thumping, we almost think of a fight, don't we? Yeah, so we almost think of a fight or aggression or some sort of violent, and then the rain would be a lot heavier, even heavier than this image in this clip here. So thumped, what do we think? These are the things that we think of, and the words, the connotations, the words that we link to the word or phrase, we could say power, we could say aggression, anger, strong or strength, punishing, force. So the writer has used that word to get the reader to think of these words. Okay, so in this question we're looking for what the writer says, what method they've used and the effect on the reader. So an example, very simple little answer for that question would be, the use of the verb thump suggests the storm seems angry, strong and punishing to the boy. Remember, if I don't know that thumped is a verb, I can just say the use of the word. Don't, for example, write the use of the adjective thumped, because that will look bad, it's incorrect and it will get you a low score. So if you're confident, use the word verb. If not, just use the word. Okay, so again, the use of the verb thump suggests the storm seems angry, punishing and strong. So there's my point, there's my quote, and then this is that I've explained why that quote shows it's scary to the boy. So the question is, how does Mark show the prisoners in Florence live in extremely harsh conditions? And this is the structure I would use for your PE. So I'd write, let's talk about that in a minute. So the first quote we're going to look at is the incredibly small cell. So that's the quote I've picked out to show they've got harsh conditions. So I've put in the text, the writer shows the harsh conditions with the phrase incredibly small cells. The adverb incredibly suggests the reader would be amazed by the tiny conditions which the men have to live in 23 hours a day. So I've got my point here about the harsh conditions, I've got my quote, the incredibly small cells, and then I've gone into a bit of terminology. Remember though, I don't have to use the terminology if I'm not sure. I know incredibly is an adverb, but if I didn't know that, then just say the word. And then here I've explained why I've chosen that quote. So why the quote I've chosen shows the conditions are slow. Well, basically, the incredibly small, it suggests to the reader that the prisoners are living in tiny, horrible conditions. Also at the bottom here, you've noticed I've put in quotes 23 hours a day. That's a quote from the text. So again, I'm showing the examiner I've read the whole article. I'm trying to get in as many quotes as possible. Okay, and there it is together if you want to pause. Okay, another one we're going to look at is the phrase concrete slabs. The prisoners, they sleep on concrete slabs as for beds. And again, I've put in the text, the writer shows the harsh conditions by describing them where the men slept as concrete slabs. The adjective concrete suggests the bed was rock solid and painful. So I'm almost saying, what are the connotations of concrete? This suggests the bed was rock solid and painful, while slab tells the reader the men are being treated like pieces of meat. Okay, again, we've got point, quote, terminology and evidence. Again, an explanation. Again, don't need to use the terminology if I'm not sure. Okay, another one we're going to look at is attack dogs. The writer shows the harsh conditions with the phrase attack dogs. The adjective attack suggests the dogs are trained with the sole purpose of physically hurting the men. It tells the reader the men live 24/7 under the threat of violence. And again, we've got the point, quote, and explanation and terminology. Okay, another one. It tells us the prisoners have hallucinations and memory loss. I'm saying, well, why does that show that they live in tough conditions? Well, this medical language is used to show the men are affected mentally and physically. So we know that the prison is tough physically for men, but this quote is also telling me they're struggling mentally as well. Point, quote, explanation. Okay, so banned explanation. So what I mean by this is where students a lot of the time go wrong is they will give me some of these explanations here. So it makes the reader want to read on. So what I mean by that is someone might give me a PE input. The writer shows the harsh conditions with the phrase enunciation. This shows the reader, or this excites the reader, or this makes the reader want to read on. That's not going to give you any marks. Where you're going to get your marks from is examining the quotes. So it makes the reader want to read on. It puts an image in the reader's mind. It makes it interesting for the reader. Do not write anything like that. You will get 0 marks. Okay, here's a few examples, some real student work. So this one got 3. So I will let you pause the video. So this got 3 out of 10. This one got 5 out of 10, so pause if you want. The big thing really is, it's not even about the analysis. You'll notice that as the numbers go up out of 10, you'll notice as many quotes are used. So I would generally say the people who use the most amount of quotes get the highest marks. So again, this person, it's not about they've written loads more, it's because they've used a lot of quotes. What we want to get away from is not 2 massive PE paragraphs on 2 quotes. We want to have 8 little paragraphs on the quotes. So instead of having 2 10-line paragraphs, let's have 10 2-sentence paragraphs. Okay, so you'll notice this one makes a lot of similar points, but it just uses lots of quotes. So summary for question 2, focus on what happens now the language is used. Try some subject terminology, only if you know. So if you're doing 5 PEs, just do 1 or using terminology. Explain why you've picked the quote and what the words mean, that's the key one. And use many examples, quotes as possible in your 13 minutes. Question 4 for the prison exam paper. So there's question. Okay, so generally for our exam paper, that's how it looks for our exams. So this question is the first one that will just be about totally on the 19th century, well the first one you're going into detail on. Just remember, treat it exactly the same as the 21st century. There might be some words you don't know, but generally be easy to read. And it is actually shorter than the other one. Normally they're only about half a page, the 19th century texts. So as you can see here, I've zoomed that in a bit, but actually on the exam paper that was only about half a page. So the question is, what do you think and feel about Dickens' views about solitary confinement as a punishment? So this question is all to do with your opinion. Okay, terminology is not needed on every point, so things like verbs, adjectives, adverbs. Maybe one of your PEs, if you're happy with your terminology, use it, otherwise don't use it. Okay, you need to use a range of quotes, so if we're looking for 5 to 6 quotes, use quotes from the beginning, middle and end of the extract. So we don't want this, where you're using quotes just in the beginning, that's not going to get you a lot of marks. We want something like this, where you're using quotes from all over the extract to show the examiner that you've read the whole extract. Okay, key things to remember in this question are, it's asking for your view, so your opinion, do you agree? Reference the question in the first line of the answer. So for example, R1 we would be saying, I feel Dickens' views are. Yeah, so use the exam question to help you. It's looking for content and method, so this means what the writer says and how he says it. So question 4 is very much like question 2, which is the how question. The only difference is this one is you're giving your opinion. So zoom in on key words and think, why has the writer used them? So let's look at an example question. The writer presents the boy as scared when he says, the rain thumped against his window. How far do you agree with this view? So it's asking for your opinion. So, for example, if it said the rain tapped against his window, we are thinking of this sort of stuff. So a soft little tap, yeah, if you tap your foot, you do it in a nice, soft, gentle way. And if talking about rain, it's going to be almost like summer rain, very soft. However, thumped, we get this impression with thumped, don't we? We get the feeling of power, violence. If you think about someone fighting, think about someone thumping someone, we think of a fight, don't we? And the rain would show that. So the rain would be a lot harder, a lot tougher. And the words that we link with thumped, with connotations, the word thumped, we'd have power, aggression, anger, strength, punishing, or force. You have to think to yourself, why has the writer used the word thumped? The writer's used these words, has used the word thumped, because the writer wants us to get the idea of these connotations. So when they've used thumped, the writer is trying to get across the power, the aggression, the force of the rain. Okay, so let's put that into a PE, really simple PE. I agree, so remember I'm linking it to the question. I agree the writer presents the boy as scared. The use of the verb thump suggests the boy sees the storm as angry, strong and punishing. Okay, so there's my point and my link to the question, that I agree with the writer. There's my quote, and then here I've said why the writers use the word, so why it makes it seem scary to the boy. Okay, so remember this question, what do you feel about Dickens' views on solitary confinement? Okay, so what I would do, and I do the same for any extract, any question, if it's a 10-mark question, zoom in on the language. So what I mean by that is look for 1 or 2 word phrase quotes and try to pick 5 or 8 quotes that present Dickens' views on solitary confinement, which basically means the prisoners being imprisoned alone. This is the structure I would use, so if you want to pause and have a look, Okay, so let's have a look at. So the example I've picked out is, I've picked out that the quote is that the conditions are rigid, strict and harsh. So I've put in the text, I feel that Dickens views solitary confinement is harsh on the men, because the writer says rigid, strict and harsh, where the rule of 3 exaggerates the regimental and pointlessness of prisoners being alone. So there's my point, that I agree, and I feel that solitary confinement is harsh on the men. Then there's my quote, and then here I've put my terminology, rule of 3. Remember, I don't have to use rule of 3 if I don't. And then my point is that this quote shows how harsh the conditions are. That I'm zooming on to the word rigid and strict to show how tough it is for the men. Okay, another quote says cruel and wrong. Okay, so I put the writer purposely uses a short sentence and places his quote at the end of the first paragraph to highlight to the reader the point of his text, that solitary confinement is wrong. Okay, another one I put is that it's a waste of life, with the phrase counts the seasons as they change and grow old. And I've put this final sentence leaves the reader with the image of the prisoners having no fun or love, but also just counting down the years until the dies alone. So if he says he counts the seasons as they change, it's almost like the years mean nothing for the person. Okay, so here's some examples. So if you want to pause and have a look at the examples yourself, feel free. Generally, as you go up the numbers, the amount of quotes will go up. Yeah, so the amount of quotes, if a person uses a lot of quotes, that's going to be helpful, but also their insight is a bit stronger as well, so they maybe pick out the points that aren't as obvious. So also the length of the question goes up, but I wouldn't be too bothered about the length of the question. What you will notice is the lower mark questions will maybe write 10 sentences on one quote, but the higher mark questions will write maybe 2 sentences on each quote, but just do a lot more quotes, and that's the route I think you should take. Okay, question 5. This is the first question when we're looking at both texts. Okay, so that's how the exam looks. Okay, so there's 2 texts in the exam, and you'll be asked question 5 to talk about both. So the question is, according to these 2 writers, how do the cells in the prison add to the prisoner's sense of feeling alone or sense of isolation? The key things about question 5 is it requires information from both texts, 4 marks available, so you should be spending 4 minutes. But the most important thing in this question is you do not have to compare. Even though you're talking about the 2 texts, you do not have to say, in text A it says this, in comparison in text B it says this. That's question 6. Question 5 is basically the same as question 1 and question 3, but it's about both texts. So it's basically you're finding information, you're searching for information. Okay, so this question is about how do the cells in prisoners add to the prisoner's sense of isolation. So this is what you're looking for. So only answer about what the cells and isolation. Don't just talk about the text in general. Be specific. So I would use this structure in the text by Dickens, in the text by Mark. So use the names of the authors to make it clear which text you're talking about. Okay, and all you're doing basically is finding the quotes. Okay, so remember it's a 4-mark question, so maybe find 2 quotes from each, just to talk about the prisoners and isolation. So I put, in the text by Dickens, the silence of the cells is awful, the men never again come out of their cell, he never sees another human apart from the guard. So I put 3 or 4 quotes there. If you're struggling with time, just do 2 each, 1 per text. So all I'm doing is picking out the information of the text. I'm not saying in this question, this suggests or anything like that, I'm just picking out the information. Mark says the men never see each other, the cells are incredibly small, and they're there 23 hours a day. Again, I've written more quotes that I need to, but I've tried to shove in everything to my answer. If you've got a bit of time, pull in more quotes. If you haven't got time, just put 2 each. Key information about question 5. It requires info from both texts, 4 marks available, 4 or 5 minutes. You do not have to compare, so do not say in comparison, in contrast. Question 6 is the last question in the exam. So this question says both of these texts talk about solitary confinement, so the prisoners being alone, and then basically the first bullet point says what the writers say about the effects of solitary confinement. So that's basically what the writers say about it, and then the second one is how they say it. So this might be they use adjectives or the structure or something like that. It's a 10-mark question. Key info for question 6. You need to compare the text, so some similarities or differences. Try and do PE paragraphs if you can. Use comparing or adverbial words like however, in contrast, likewise. 10 marks available, 13 to 15 minutes. This is the only question in the exam where you have to compare the 2 texts. So there's the first text and the questions. There's the second text. Say what's the same, what's the difference about the particular question. Be clear which text you're talking about. Okay. Easy way of doing that is using the writer's names. So that's how I would do it. Don't worry if you feel like you might be repeating points if you've already written them in past questions. Okay. So same and differences on this question. Okay, so the words I would try to use would be these kind of words for the similarities, and these were the words and differences. Don't worry about sounding boring or robotic in your answer. So what I would do now is I would choose a word from the left column and choose a word from the right column. So for example, I would choose likewise for saying similarities, and I would use however for saying differences. Don't worry about trying to use different ones each time. Just pick one and stick with it. How many points and quotes do you need to use? 5 points each. I would basically try to use as many quotes as you can in your 13 to 15 minutes. Okay, so what I would do in this question, like I'll do for other questions, is look at the question and try to highlight quotes. So for example, this one is about the effect of solitary confinement. So I would go through both texts and highlight anything to do with the prisoners being alone or lonely. This is the structure that I would use for the question, so feel free to pause. Okay, so here's an example I would put. Both writers feel the same about solitude causing mental breakdowns. Dickens uses the phrase torturing anxieties, where the adjective torturing creates the image of the prisoner almost enjoying punishing the men. So I've zoomed into the word torturing and say what the connotations are. Then I put likewise. Mark uses the phrase hallucinations and memory loss. This creates the image of the prisoners having mental delusions, prisoners having mental delusions and not knowing what is real and what's not. Okay, so that's all there put together. So if we look at that a little bit more of how that's been structured. So I've got my points that both writers, so what the similarity is, both writers say that being on their own causes mental breakdowns. Then I've got my quote from text 1. Okay, then I've explained why I've used that quote. Then I've got my comparative word, my adverbial, likewise, and then I've done the same for text 2. So pause if you need to. Okay, another one I've put is both writers feel the same about the negative effect solitary has. Dickens says the silence is awful, which suggests he couldn't stand to be there even as he wasn't a prisoner, so just as a person going to sea. Likewise, again, I'm saying something similar. Mark uses the phrase forced into silence, where the verb force creates the image of the prisoners being gagged and perhaps being punished if they speak a single word. Both the writers suggest silence make the prison a miserable and depressing place. Okay, there you go. So pause again if you need to. Okay, so I've done the same as before. Point for each, quote for each, and I put the word in the middle to say if it's the same or difference. Okay, here are some past student examples. This one got 3 out of 10. Pause if you need to. This one got 6 out of 10. Pause if you need to. This one got 9 out of 10. Pause if you need to. You'll notice basically the ones that get higher grades use more quotes and they go into a bit more detail. It's not just about length. I tell all my students the main thing is do not do a 10-line answer on one quote. Do a 2-line answer on 7 or 8 quotes. So to every quote, talk about it for 2 lines. Don't waffle about the same point. So top tips then for the exams: 13 marks, 13 minutes for the 10-mark questions, 4 minutes for the shorter ones. If you can't find an answer from question 1 to 3, leave it. Use terminology, adverbs, simile for 10-mark questions, but only if you need to, only if you know it. If you're doing 5 PEs, just do it once. Do not do it all the time. You won't get a lot of marks for just going, that's a simile. Okay, make your PE short, so 2 sentences per quote is enough. Zoom in on a quote and analyse the effect on the reader. Time manage, so for example, if after question 2 is a 13-minute question, after 13 minutes, if you've not only done 2 quotes, you move on, you don't spend extra time. Use a highlighter to pick out keywords and don't comment on any words you don't recognise. So for example, if you don't recognise a word, don't go into detail analysing it because you might be getting the wrong end of the stick. I hope this has been and helped you. Cheers.